Hey guys, welcome back to Mystifying Miracles. Today's story is about a man who fell off of a boat. And his story it's amazing, as they all are, right? But he says the only thing he can conclude is that a pair of heavenly hands pulled him from the ocean that day. I'm going to get into all the details, so stay tuned. It was in April of 1993 when two men by the name of Don Spann and John Thompson, they took out Don's 46-foot boat, and they were just going on a routine 2-day cruise type trip that they did all the time. They were headed towards Fort Lauderdale, Florida. On this day, they had just left the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, so they were getting their trip underway. The weather was great. But once day 2 came, the clouds began to roll in, and the storms looked like they were coming. On that day, John was at the helm, so he was steering the vessel, while Don, he was in back of the ship. Don, he was the type of guy, he stressed the importance of safety all the time. And, to his employees at Span America, where he worked, he stressed that to all of them. So it was very odd that on this particular day, as Don was in the back of the ship, instead of wearing his life jacket, it was laying next to him on the seat. Well, as the seas got more rough by the minute, the boat began to just bounce and dip as those waves started getting more and more strength. And Don, where he had been sitting towards the back, he decided to stand, and he tried to catch his bearings as he stood, but the timing was bad because as he was doing that, the boat slapped down on this high wave, and, well, it sent Don flying. He lost his balance, he fell over the side, which made him hit the swim platform, thereby crashing into the rough seas. He said that by the time he had surfaced the water after he fell in, the boat had already passed and gone by. Obviously, he begins to panic and frantically waving his hands while yelling for John, help, anything. But you know how loud it is on the ocean, especially rough seas. That's not going to carry too far. And John, he didn't hear him. Don says he watched as about 5 or 6 more waves crashed over. And then by that time, the boat, he couldn't see it any longer. And he said that eventually he could no longer hear the engine. And once that last sound just left and all that was left was Don in the rough seas, he said it was the loneliest moment that he had ever felt in his life. Don held on to hope, though. He was hopeful that surely John's going to notice I'm gone, turn the boat back around, and all will be well. But 10 minutes goes by, 10 or 15, and Don doesn't see the boat returning. And he wondered as he just sloshed around and treaded water in the sea, he was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get out of this predicament? He knew that he had to continually move and tread water, 1, to stay above it. 2, hypothermia was a real thing. And the temperatures, they were dropping. So many thoughts ran through Don's mind. Things such as, what if a shark comes? Oh my gosh, am I going to drown? And in those moments as he was thinking that, he also thought of his family and how devastated that they would be once they learned what happened. Also, in regards to John, who was driving the boat, you got to remember he was at the front, so he's facing frontwards. He still has no idea that Don fell over and is missing, so that's the reason he hasn't turned around thus far. Well, Don's breathing, it started to become more and more labored, and he would go back from floating to his stomach to his back and forth, right? But that gets you so far because you get exhausted. And he said 25 more minutes passes by as he's doing all that. And each minute of those 25 minutes felt like excruciating hours. He said he began to think of God. And that was something he hadn't done in a very long time. As the waves continued to just slap and all over the place crazy, and he's treading water and floating, and he begins to talk to God. And he tells God, he says, God, you're using drastic measures to get my attention. I'm sorry I haven't been smart enough to listen to you. But if you let me live, I'll fulfill your mission for me, whatever that might be. And that was kind of the words that he used just to chat with God, because he was desperate. And Don says that's when he began to hear a voice from within. The voice would say things. He said it's like it was almost whispering and a little bit seductive, but also scary. And it would say things like, you're not going to get out of this situation. Why don't you relax? Die peacefully. Don tried ignoring it, but that wasn't helping. It continued to talk to him and say things like, give up. Just give up. Don got so annoyed, he finally yelled back at it, screamed at it, no, I'm gonna fight. And that voice continued to try to deter Don and distract him, but Don wasn't having it. He said even though by this point he was so cold and his body was slowing down and he was so exhausted, he still fought. He was determined. He was not giving up. And he prayed for the Lord, Lord, just don't let me be alone. Just continue to be with me in this moment. The voice eventually went away. And by this point, Don had been in the water for an hour. Slowly, he was sinking. Little bit more as each minute passed. He remembers continually thinking that he was on top of a wave, out of the water, only to realize, nope, I'm under it, and, come up gasping for air. So confusion was setting in from all the exhaustion and continually just trying to fight for his life. So he said that at one point in the distance, he thought he heard the boat's engine. And so he'd look out as far as he could see, and he'd try to concentrate just on this one spot, kind of in the direction of where he thought he heard the motor. And that spot in the distance, it was getting closer and closer and closer until Don finally realized, that's John. He knew that was his buddy John at the helm, and John had turned the boat around to come back and find him. John obviously starts flailing about and screaming at the top of his lungs again. He's feeling joy and thankfulness, and he just doesn't want the boat to pass him up again by accident. So he's trying to get his attention as best he can, And so John did see him. He threw in a rope, but Don was so weak at this point, he had no energy to even grab onto the rope. This is when Don says he thought John jumped in to help him. He says he also recalls a pair of arms holding on to one arm, starting to pull him up. And as that's happening, he feels another pair of hands on the other arm, pulling that side of him up. Don says he remembers thinking as this was happening, and he's out of it and still confused, but he does remember thinking, wow, how did John find a second person to come help him? That was going through his head at the moment. Well, the sets of arms pulled Don up only so far, so now Don is right below the swim ladder, and his muscles, they're kaput. They froze up. He can't move. He's so cold and tired. So he's not able to pull himself up the ladder. And in that moment, Don says he thought for sure that's going to be the spot where he drowns finally, right under the ladder that hangs off the boat. And something amazing starts to happen. Don says he's depleted, right? He feels a pair of hands, like strong hands, he described it. And he could feel the palms of both hands push up under his booty, his little hiney, because he's still in the water, right? And he's trying to hang on to this ladder. There's no strength to pull himself up. So these pair of hands, he says, pushes up on his little rear end and helps him give that leverage to get up onto the ladder. From there, John was able to reach down and help get hold of Don and drag him up and over into the boat. From there, the Coast Guard helicopter came, picked up Don and took him to the hospital. He was taken to Jacksonville University Hospital, and he was treated for 4 days for hypothermia. And it was soon thereafter that Don started to think of the events of that day, and it all started coming back to him. And it was just shocking. He eventually had that conversation with John because he wanted to ask him, who did you find to help pull me up onto the boat that day? Well, John just kind of looked at him, kind of like just this perplexed, confused look on his face, because Don's going into the story of, yeah, John, how you jumped into the water. And Don tells him, whoa, I never jumped into the water that day. And he tells John says, I only pulled you from the swim platform. That's the only time I pulled you onto the boat. I never jumped in, and I never pulled you anywhere else. And he assures Don that, yeah, I was alone. I didn't have anybody else with me, and I didn't see anybody else. Crazy, guys. Sounds like the hand of God, angels. Very, very interesting. Now, Don, he did make a full return to health, and not too long after this, he was back at the helm of his own boat again. He thinks back on that day, and he says, I do not know why God spared me that day. I just do not know. But I always give thanks to God because of it. And a quote at the end of this story of Don's, he says, I sense that I am to pay attention and wait to be shown what I am to do. End quote. So isn't that a cool one, guys? Like the whole time he's thinking his friend and some other rando, I guess, were pulling him up when in fact, the two sets of hands in the very beginning were not John at all. So you got a question like, well, then who was that? But is that not an amazing story? I just love these stories, and they put a smile on my face, and they renew my faith when I read them and when I research them. And I hope they do to you too. I hope that they give you encouragement, and if nothing else, a smile for the day. So I hope you guys are having a great week, and thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you guys for the next one.